Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Chuck Hunt, and I'm the Family Ministries pastor here at Lake Avenue Church in Pasadena, California. And I want to welcome you to our Parenting Ministries webinar, Back to Normal, with a big question mark, thriving with teens and technology. So as we began the new year, I was in contact with a few of you who were really concerned about what this year would look like and how our families would be different because of the amount of time that your students and that you were spending online. And now this is really actually become a reality in our lives more than it ever has before. And we want to deal with tonight this subject and what happens and how we can talk about and talk through all of the issues that are in front of us. This webinar has been tailored for parents of teens and preteens, but we know that whatever age your kids are, or if you don't have kids yet, this information can be helpful to you. Lake Avenue Parenting Ministry is here to help you be a parent, and uniquely better. Unique because each family is different. Our cultures are different. We come from different economic backgrounds and sometimes in the same family. But we have the same Lord who's gifted us uniquely and called us to each other. Better, well, because at each stage of our kids' lives, we need to be better. As we become better individuals, better disciples, better parents, we're helping our kids be better and know God better. As we begin to allow ourselves to dream about how we can get back to what feels comfortable or what may even feel normal, we are having to face some new challenges in our world. Issues in our world and opinions about them have caused conflict in us. They've caused conflict in our families. They've caused conflict around us. And tonight, we are not trying to solve all the issues of the world, but we want to take a look at one issue in our world, and that is technology. What do we do with the technology, and what do we do with our kids as they engage technology? I remember for me, and my daughter's about to turn 18, she when she was younger, we really struggled to find ways in which to get her to do things. We would ground her, and that was fine. She would go to her room and spend hours and hours, and that would find time out. Man, she was fine with timeout. Thank you, Dad, for sending me to timeout. And we worked so hard to try and figure out what was the way that, the punishment, the thing that we could get that would get her motivated to things. And we finally figured out when she was younger that if we took away books from her, she would lose her mind, absolutely lose her mind. I remember a moment where I said, no reading. You got to sit out here, no TV, you cannot read. And she said, what kind of parent takes away their books from their children? And I was like, yes, I've won. We finally figured it out. Well, that stopped when she got a phone. I could take her books away all day long. And when she got a phone, everything shifted. And the phone was the thing that if we took away, that was the moment we were taking away all of her friends. We were taking away all of her entertainment. And now she still reads and reads quite a lot. But there's no punishment like taking away the phone from a teenager. Many of you know that. I think it's that type of engagement, that type of reality that we're all working with, this shift to tech and finding out what is going to be the most helpful ways that we move our families forward in times like that. It may be helpful to you to know how this is going to work. We're going to have opportunities to hear from our two panelists, and then time for questions. So don't worry, there'll be moments along the way for you to interact with the panelists and each other. And no, we're not going to put you in small groups, but we are, once again, offering an opportunity for a conversation this Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Grab a coffee, sit with us for a few moments, and we'll just chat about the things that are that were facing us in our own community. But for tonight, there will be moments for questions in the Q&A. You'll see the button there at the bottom of your screen, as well as a poll and opportunities to comment in the chat section. We want this to be interactive as best we possibly can. The panelists and I will prompt you at the appropriate moments for all of this. And during the presentations as well, you can send a message or a question to myself or to Sarah Beckin, our Family Ministries admin associate, and we'll try and respond there as well. With all of that introduction, let's get started. I want to introduce our panelists. Rick Rekedal has worked with kids and family entertainment development his entire career, including over 20 years with DreamWorks Animation, featuring projects such as Prince of Egypt, Shrek, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, and Trolls. Rick is currently leading a tech startup in the home digital space and is the author of One Small Step, a personal story of a family dealing with the effects of suicide and alcoholism recovery. And Rick has shared some of that on his journey with us in other spaces as well, with MOPS and Moms Now. Rick serves on multiple boards and is a proud dad of 3 strong independent daughters. Rick lives in Pasadena here with his wife Vicky of 27 years and their schnoodle dog Winston. That gives him all the credence in the world to be able to tell us good things about life. Thanks for being here, Rick. Also presenting is Art Bamford. Art is a graduate of Fuller Seminary and is currently a PhD candidate in media studies at University of Colorado at Boulder and a senior research fellow at the Center for Media, Religion, and Culture. He has authored 2 books, including Every Parent's Guide to Navigating Our Digital World with Kara Powell and Brad Griffin. You would know those names from previous webinars. We're giving away 2 copies of those books during our presentations tonight as well. I'm so grateful that they said yes to sharing with us. So let me be quiet for a minute and hand it over to Art, because I'm really excited what Art has to share with us tonight. Art.
Cool. Thank you. And hello, everybody. It's always good if you know how to use the technology for the webinar about technology, you know.
There you go.
But thanks again. And as Chuck mentioned, I used to live right down the street, so I feel like I'm virtually visiting old neighbors. But this would sort of ordinarily be the topic, but we're going to do the COVID version tonight. And so I want to kind of walk through questions, or these are kind of themes, I guess, that come up a lot in talking with parents about sort of media use in the home and that kind of thing. And so I'll go through each of these, and then I've tried to find any recent research and just helpful, relevant information about COVID and kind of how some of this relates to COVID. But I'm really looking forward more to the discussion and the Q&A. Just to think through that and hear about people's experiences with all of that. So the first question has to do with kind of the seemingly compulsive use of devices that young people seem to have. And so I think it's helpful to kind of start by stepping back and thinking about how young people today understand media and kind of technology as they're using it. And it's easy for us to forget that we grew up in most cases, we're saying when our first cell phone came along, but we grew up in a different kind of technological world. And so we have a lot of assumptions and things that we've kind of imported with us into this new reality. And for a lot of kids and young adults, they don't bring that with them. And just in general, kids kind of understand these things a little bit differently. And so there's 2 sort of analogies that I want to talk about a little bit. With younger kids, they kind of approach digital media as a type of playground. They're mostly interested in having fun and that kind of thing. And then with adolescents, it's kind of like a school lunchroom, school cafeteria. So I'll explain those in a minute. And I actually have Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood up here. Because some of this research actually goes further back, that, I'm kind of using these spaces to help us understand this, because that's one of the ways that kids understand media, is that it's like visiting a place. And so that's why Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, those are places, because that makes sense to kids that they're going to visit Sesame Street, visit the neighborhood after school and that type of thing. So first, like I said, with younger kids, they mostly are just wanting to play with technology and have fun. And so a lot of the same kind of basic ideas apply, that you want to, make sure they're safe, make sure there aren't any strange people wandering around, some of that kind of stuff. But, and then the kind of the appeal of it is sort of obvious. It's just more engaging than the other options that they have. But what I thought would be helpful kind of to think about in this, analogy of the playground, is kind of what goes on when we're using media. And so this actually applies to kids and adults and teenagers. And so when we're using these things, kind of what happens in our brains is that we go into something that, scholars call it a flow state. And if you are an athlete or a musician or something, if you've ever kind of been in the zone, that's a flow state. It's that kind of a thing. And so it's, your brain sort of downshifts, it kind of shifts gears into this other type of state. And so that is where a lot of the enjoyment comes from, because that's relaxing. It kind of gives certain parts of our brain a chance to kind of, relax a little bit. But the interesting thing, and why I bring this up, is that if you look at all the research on various kinds of sort of bad behavior, stuff that we would want to avoid with media, ranging from bullying to some of the more negative effects from video games, porn, we can go on and on with different, examples. But a lot of those things happen when we're in that kind of flow state mindset. And so I think one of the things that's really helpful to start kind of working on with younger kids is the ability to kind of manage that and to sort of be able to I compared it to shifting gears. So being able to kind of, shift out of that flow state gear, it's something that we just have to kind of learn and practice. And so the nice thing is it's not that hard to do. But what you have to do is basically talk out loud. And so when we speak out loud, it kind of snaps you out of that flow state a little bit. And so as younger kids, if they're watching a show, they're playing on your tablet or something like that, just asking them, what are you watching? Do you like the movie? How's your game going? That kind of thing. Those quick interactions, that's really helpful because it helps them to kind of develop that ability, to kind of snap in and out of that state of mind. So that's a really good, kind of a helpful thing to keep in mind. And that's true with adults, like I said, and teens as well. So just kind of trying to verbalize a lot more, which I think is hard. If you think about how we use our devices, it's usually very kind of silent, and personal and that kind of thing. So that's sort of the younger kids version of it. But then as kids get older, when they get into adolescence, and this is particularly true with social media, it sort of functions a lot like a school lunchroom. So if you think about the, lunchtime when you were in high school, you're paying attention to who's sitting together and where they're sitting and what people are wearing, who dyed their hair purple and who pierced their nose, all those little details, all that kind of social, information is floating around. And what's going on for adolescents, physically, obviously you're becoming an adult, but you're also becoming an adult kind of psychologically. And so what that means is that basically young people are trying to figure out their own identity. And so that's sort of all throughout adolescence. This is a constant sort of concern that they have. It's like figuring out, what's my identity? Who are my friends? Who are not my friends? What are my interests? All that kind of stuff. And so the main tool that they have to do that is just socializing, and primarily with their peers. That's kind of the main way that they are able to do that. And so, with social media, it's similar in the sense that, they're sort of paying attention to who's sharing what, who's following, which accounts, all of that kind of stuff, similar to what they would be observing in the lunchroom. They're kind of soaking all of that in. And so one of kind of the probably the top scholar with all this stuff, I think, said it really well. Dana Boyd said that most teens aren't addicted to social media. If anything, they're addicted to each other. And I think that's really helpful to keep in mind, that it's a very natural kind of inclination for adolescents to want to socialize like this. And I promise Lake didn't put me up to this, but I think youth group is actually great in this regard, because if you think about church youth groups, they're that, the same kind of space as the lunchroom. And obviously, if we want kids to have more, face-to-face rather than doing all of this virtually, those kinds of environments are really, really helpful. And so I think this is helpful to kind of keep this in mind, this lunchroom idea, partly because, it explains the sort of addictive kind of nature of teenagers using social media, but also a lot of the stuff that they do just doesn't make any sense to adults. It's like, why are you just scrolling, liking every single picture in your feed? Why are you trying to learn a TikTok dance or something like that? And again, it's more this kind of, social group behavior type of thing. So a lot of it doesn't make sense, but it sort of makes sense to them. And the good news is that this is kind of normal for adolescents. And so when we're starting to see now, we've had this technology long enough, we can kind of see from childhood through adolescence into early adulthood. And for most young people, they're going to increase their technology use and their social media, time through adolescence, but then it will kind of decrease a bit as they get into young adulthood. Like a lot of other kind of teenage habits, it's something that most kids will outgrow. Now, another thing I wanted to mention, so I did look tried to find some of the more recent kind of research about the COVID experience. And obviously, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, but obviously young people are on their devices way more and spending a lot more time doing that. And so I think that this is also a good thing to keep in mind, kind of as it relates to that, because one of the things that kids have lost is the actual school lunchroom. So they've sort of had to give up some of that kind of social time, which, like I said, I mean, it's really important to them kind of developmentally to have those spaces. And so I think, in this way, social media has actually kind of been helpful, in providing them an outlet for some of those things. So a little bit of good news with COVID. Now, the next kind of question, the next topic I wanted to talk about was the issue of screen time. And something we talk about this a little more in the book. But, I think it's helpful to kind of recognize that screen time is a term that we came up with for television when we were young. Not that we're not still very vibrant, or however you want to put it. But that idea of screen time as a kind of parenting technique, that comes from television. But if you think about how TV works, it stays in one place. The shows are all 30 minutes or an hour for the most part. The content reflects what time of day it is. So there's morning shows and after school and late night and all that kind of stuff. And so it's easy, all you really need to worry about with TV is that question of screen time. Are your kids going to watch, 2 cartoons or 6 cartoons or something like that? And so with digital media, that's one of the big fundamental differences, is that it doesn't have that kind of built-in, schedule that something like television has. Kind of a better way to try to think about this and approach it is to think about rituals and routines. So how can you kind of, establish, certain rhythms and that type of thing. And I think a lot of times when parents are concerned with screen time, it sort of is the lack of these things that they're sort of looking for, if that makes sense. And so with rituals, a good example would be church. it happens at a certain time in a certain place. There's usually, familiar faces there, that kind of thing. And so I think it's good, think about what could be some rituals that you can create around using technology and not using technology, just to kind of create that, that kind of rhythm. And then routines, I think in a lot of ways, routines, it's very similar, but I tend to think rituals are more kind of group, activities. Routines are more the personal, things like when are you texting your friends, when are you putting your device away for the night, and that kind of thing. So similar idea, but just, kind of two different instances of it. Now with COVID, obviously, again, it sort of complicates everything. And so one of the studies that I found, they said that screen viewing for one particular age group has gone up about 4 hours a day. And personally, I think that's a little low from some of what I've heard. But even that, you think just that 4 hours a day, 4 hours is higher than I think what the Pediatric Association would recommend. So we're like completely over some of the recommendations there. But again, I think it's important that this is a unique time. It's disrupted a lot of rituals in our lives, in a variety of ways. And I actually think that now that we're starting to kind of move out of the COVID phase, it's a good opportunity because, there's a lot of different routines and rituals in life that we're going to have to kind of reestablish and be rethinking about. And so I think that's, potentially some good news going forward. And I will also say, I teach at CU, and this is something I kind of personally try to think about of rituals and routines. And the beginning of the semester is another good time, just because as you figure out your kind of schedule and that kind of thing, so that might be a good time going forward as well. And then kind of overall, I wanted to mention that when it comes to both the amount of media that young people consume and then kind of the ways that they use it, the most influential thing that parents can do or will do is their own technology use. And so I think that's kind of a good challenge when it comes to this idea of creating rituals and routines and that kind of thing. As adults, we need to also create those and try to follow those. And if kids see that there's, a disconnect between, we're trying to create, routines for them and then we're not following our own, their takeaway is going to be what you're doing more than what you're saying. So I think that's good to keep in mind. And with older kids in particular, again, I think this is a nice opportunity that kids can actually help you in this regard. Kind of a buddy system. If you're trying to stick to a new routine, or let's say you've been texting too late at night or something like that, partner with kids, and they'll appreciate, being treated kind of as more of a peer if they're a little bit older. So I think that that's another sort of good thing to think about, depending on how old your kids are, if they're a little older. And another sort of nice thing in all of this, we tend to think more about some of the potential negative, consequences. But there was one study where they found that when young people talked about some of their happiest memories with their families growing up, one of the most common themes that came up was kind of media-centric activities. So things like a movie night or watching a certain TV show, gaming together as a family, those kinds of things. And so I think that there's, it's good in the sense of limiting, screen time and that kind of thing. But some of those rituals will also be things that kids really cherish, kind of looking back on them. So that's, a little more additional motivation. And similar to that, if you ever need tech help, kids really, really like it if you ask them to help you figure out how to do something. And if they don't know, they'll pretend like they know. So just make sure you have an actual tech support person to fix whatever they do. All right, so then the last sort of category here is just kind of general anxiety Are there other things that parents should be doing differently, or something like that? So a couple kind of quick things here. One is to stop competing with other parents. And a lot of kind of my work in this area has been doing interviews and focus groups with parents. And probably the most interesting thing for me has been seeing how conversations with a group of parents are completely different than a one-on-one conversation. And so when I talk one-on-one with a parent, they're telling me stories and sharing things that are totally different than what they would say in front of other parents. And I think, it's sort of frustrating to see that, because what I can recognize is that they're all going through the same stuff behind the scenes, but they don't want to admit it. And so I think it's important to try to kind of cultivate more of a culture among parents of being more honest and kind of helping each other with this stuff. And I love I think Chuck mentioned the follow-up event later this week, Saturday. Was that right?
Yeah,
But
Saturday.
yeah, I think stuff like that is great. To meet other parents and that kind of thing. And think, obviously your kids' friends and neighbors and stuff like that are great to connect with. But through something like your church, if you could find parents whose kids are a little bit older, that can be super helpful because they've just gone through all of the fiascos that you that you may encounter pretty soon. So think about some of those relationships, and then also think about if you have high school age kids. It could be enormously helpful. The help that you wish you had when your kids were younger. Keep in mind that is a way that you can kind of serve some other parents as well. Another thing, I mentioned I'm more on kind of the research side of things, and I think a lot of it can be very helpful. But there's so much variety, and this is another thing that's different, I think, about digital media, is that the ways kids use it, depends on their gender and their age and their personality and how many siblings they have, and I mean all kinds of stuff. And so keep that in mind as you seek out advice and things like that. That at the end of the day, I think you will know what's best for your kids. And it's good to kind of trust that. And then sort of last but not least, and we talk about this in the book, which obviously was pre-COVID, but in all those kind of interviews that I've done, I think there's so much frustration and stress among parents about all of this. And the reality is that it is new terrain. This is uncharted territory as far as parenting goes. And so, if it feels like you're making it up as you go along, it's because you're making it up as you go along. And that can be kind of daunting. But, I think that sort of is where we're at. And so it's important to give yourself some grace in all of that, and just feel like as long as you're doing your best, that will serve your kids well. And then needless to say, I don't need to tell any of you that COVID, again, has kind of amplified all of this. And we're just starting to see some of the effects there. But again, I think give yourself some grace, be patient, with yourself and with your kids, because this is thankfully, hopefully, a once in a century kind of experience. So I know that's a lot, and hopefully we can discuss more specifics and stuff like that. But my email's there, and I'll make that available through Lake as well. But I'm happy, feel free if you ever have another question or something like that. I'm happy to chat more. So
Cool. Thanks so much, Art. I really appreciate that. I think the encouragement for everyone right now is that this would be the moment to ask questions. So you can throw those in the chat. You can ask them directly to Art or myself or to Sarah, and we can start a discussion around those really briefly. We want to be able to respond to that, or get the questions that you need answered. answered in moments like this. But I also want to make sure that that we just hear different voices. I know I heard some really cool things that Art said, but I want to hear from you, Rick, a little bit about what your thoughts were as Art was sharing his presentation. What stood out to you in the midst of Art's presentation?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chuck, and thanks, Art, so much. That was really, really strong and so encouraging. First of all, to hear that we're not alone in kind of feeling these tensions and struggling with these issues, and it is incredibly frustrating. I talk to a lot of parents, and there's so much of a sense of I don't even know where to start in this space. And something that you said that actually I went in and added to one of my slides. So we're going to make sure we connect, sync up directly. and because with slightly different words that help people kind of go, oh yeah, that is what we're talking about. That is what I'm experiencing. As you talked about getting in that flow state, that, something else kind of takes over when I'm in my digital experience, that is this flow state. And I love that terminology. Because it kind of becomes that uninterrupted hamster wheel type, behavior that goes over and over. And to not necessarily be as intimidated by that, if a simple cue to pull out of that could just be verbalizing, and to step in and ask a question. How are you doing in that? What's going on in there? I noticed that, frankly, between my wife and me, we'll be driving along, we're making a Trader Joe's run, and all of a sudden things have gotten quiet, and I look over and, she's in her phone, and I don't want to interrupt. 27 years of marriage, I know what not to do. And yet, after all, I'm like, are you talking to somebody? It's like, oh yeah, one of our kids just sent this thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, what is it? And all of a sudden, that engagement helps both of us get back. Oh yeah, we're together while you just got something that came in. So I just felt that was really helpful language, to be sensitive of, hey, these flow states can happen kind of so quickly. And all of a sudden, even though we might be physically in the same room, we're totally isolated because I'm in a flow state and you're wanting to know what the heck I'm doing. And, for us to trust that there's safe space for you to just ask, it may sound so elementary, but how often do we let things run forever, right? Without just kind of having the permission to do that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was a really good piece. One of the things that you said, Art, that I was really intrigued by was the idea around the digital playground, especially for younger kids, and the thought around digital media as a digital playground in which we allow. And I think with that imagery, there's a way to create some rules around engagement, right? So how do we go to the playground? Well, we go to the playground at this particular point in time. Specifically for younger kids, we only go to the playground in the daytime, right? So you go to the playground in the daytime, you go and you meet people there, and maybe there's moments to have play dates or those type of things. That could be really helpful. I have a younger nephew who they have determined a lot of screens in the house, but they've determined that the way that they'll play is allow them to play the games that are interactive with their friends, and that they've got to talk with their friends versus the ones that are just I'm just gonna get really good at swiping my finger across the screen. So they've done that really well, and I'm grateful for that, and the imagery for sure on that. I didn't see any questions come in. Sarah, did you see any questions come in the chat or towards you? Nope, no questions. So be thinking, folks, about questions you can ask, things that are coming to mind. Get the questions that you came here for answered. Please don't leave here without getting those things asked and answered with our guests. I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Rick has a presentation for us that goes alongside of that, and I'm really excited for what you're about to share, Rick. Thanks.
You bet. Okay, this will hopefully pick up right where Art left off. And, as we're all talking together in community tonight, there's going to be some different flavors of the same conversation. And I think that's actually helpful. And hopefully that will be insightful for you as well. Coming out of this post-COVID age, we've all experienced something in common, which is we've all been forcibly moved into this digital age. So much has happened that, you know, we never would have chose on our own, or have had made that decision on our own. And yet, you know, here we all are. And so now how do we come out of it? And what's happened? What has just happened to us, and what's just happened to me and my kids? I've spent a large part of my career in the digital space, especially in gaming. Games that I've helped produce have sold in the millions of copies, tens of millions of downloads. Won a couple of games of the year. You know, I've been involved in game design, game development, game distribution, and there's some particularly useful language that might help you understand what the heck is going on when my kids are in this flow state, or when my husband's in this flow state, or when I'm stuck in this flow state. And, you know, helping give some language to that often can help burst the bubble. You know, Art, you had that Mr. Rogers logo in your deck, and, you know, Mr. Rogers had that way of saying, listen, the hardest things are easier if we can just label them. If we can label them, then we can talk about them. And so I want to dive into some of that, and just give a little bit of a picture of what it's like to view the digital experiences from a designer's point of view. And it might just be a bit of a reminder that digital experiences, apps, programs, things we do on a phone, things we do on our iPad, games that we play, are specifically designed. They're created by very, very smart, artistically driven game designers who understand analytics. And I say game designers, even though some, I'm not just talking about games, apps, things that are gamified, whether it's my workout app or the music I listen to, the streaming devices I use, the way I watch programming inside of Netflix. When you finish a Netflix show, it forces the next episode immediately on you, unless you've gone in and told it not to do that. Most of us don't do that, and so it forces that on us, right? What's that called? That's called a compulsion loop. And designers of digital experiences specifically create compulsion loops to keep us in this flow state. It is endless. And so getting a picture of what that really looks like can be helpful. And so it starts with that trigger hook. We get a post, we get a like, we get a buzz, we're forced the next episode. All of a sudden, I sat down to watch one episode, and I've watched now 4. Why is that? Because it's hooked me in with those compulsion loops. And I get a reward for doing so. I get a little dopamine rush. I get a moment of engagement. I literally get a physical sensation because I'm touching my fingers on a screen that's buzzing. And that replaces a lot of physical touch I've been missing if I've been in COVID and in lockdown for a long time. So I actually create a chemical, emotional bond with this device. That's a true statement. And then that results in me wanting, of course, to seek more of that. And of course, that creates higher cravings and a stronger emotional attachment, which is why if I'm attached to my phone and then I lose it, I can experience and demonstrate the same kind of jittery behaviors that a smoker might exhibit if they can't find their pack of smokes. And that's not a joke. I mean, that happens. It's the same chemical addictive state that happens. So that's this flow state that Art's talking about. It's specifically designed, and it can be insidious. And so, you know, just like that little kid, that's actually me, not my kid, when I'm experiencing all the doom scrolling that I get stuck in. All right. What's really going on is that these digital experiences, that when we're stuck in this flow state, they lack what are called stopping cues. Now, historically, any analog experience that we have created as humans, whether it's for entertainment or information or communication or getting together, everything in the analog world, in the analog space, has a natural stopping cue. Like Chuck said, you know, a play date at the park is in the daytime. The sun starts to go down, that's a stopping cue. We're going home. You know in the back of your head, you're not going to be stuck in the playground all day. And so it might seem super obvious. Books have chapters. Watching a movie, at the end of the movie, it stops. You're done. Hour 90 minutes, we're done. Let's watch the game. At the end of the game, it's over. Right? You know, Baylor won. Okay, well, that's over, you know. And so we can enjoy these experiences as families, but they have natural stopping cues. And so our suggestion to step into that flow state and talking out loud and having an engagement can be a natural stopping cue that helps interrupt that that endless cycle of the compulsion loop that keeps me doing these over and over and over again. And so I want to kind of lay that as the groundwork because you're not alone. And if you're feeling like you're stuck in some of these things, or you're seeing your kids stuck in some of these things, there is a reason why. And it's not because any of us is a bad person or because we lack the ability to get out of it. It's because they're designed to do that with us. And then the thing to remember is that this is just as a truism about being human, is that we're drawn to the things that leave us feeling down more than we are than the things that feel us leaving up. So what's self-reported among people who use apps and digital experiences on their phones at the national level is that almost 2.5 times more we spend time in things that leave us feeling negative than things that leave us feeling positive. I don't want to rabbit trail into all the reasons why. It just is, I think, important to make that statement. And so recognize that if I get stuck in compulsion loops and I've forgotten what my stopping cues should be, and this behavior that I'm doing in these compulsion loops is 2.5 times negative versus positive, then it helps me not kid myself. I'm saying, well, I just was, reading up in the newsfeed, and that's okay. And I kind of need that information. I was just checking my friends. Well, most of that actually leaves us feeling more down than up. And so we can be together all afternoon, but if we're all stuck in our phones, at the end of that time, we're going to feel crabby, as opposed to feeling that it was a life-giving experience. It may seem obvious, but I think it's important just to kind of call that out. Is there hope in the middle of all this? And I just want to make it super, super clear that it is never too late to establish the culture we want in our home. And it starts with us, as Art was saying. Before I look at my kids and say, you're on your phone too much, I need to look at the model I am setting. The number one complaint of 12-year-olds in America is, ready for this? My parents are on their phones too much. And this is because Gen Z kids are digital natives who've never not known a phone. To them, it's not that big of a deal necessarily. But to all of us who became millennials late in life, and we're still kind of enamored by this, boy, we get stuck in it. And we can tell ourselves, well, because I have to check on a job, or because I'm waiting for so-and-so, or this is just really important to me, whatever, right? That picture on the right, the kids actually more engaged in a physical creative activity than the maker generation. And yet, of course, there's dad saying, no, I was with the kids the whole time. I was there. No, it was great. I watched them draw their thing. But most of the time, I was actually in my phone. So what I'm trying to do is not make anybody feel guilty. I just want to call the obvious. And I'm the first to say, I get stuck in this loop all the time. Now, I have 3 word charts. And so what I like to say is, if this looks interesting to you or helpful, go ahead and take a screenshot. And of course, we'll also provide the information afterwards as well. But I want to skip a stone across a couple of ideas that start with, how do I think of the culture of our home? You can have a point of view. You can be intentional about what is the culture that you want in your home. And it can start by saying, what, we can be in charge of this. We don't have to be, the victims of this, or we don't have to feel like, oh, this is all just happening to us. And so it can start with, have we sat down? Have my spouse and I sat down? Have my partner and I sat down? If I'm a single parent, have I sat down with a good friend of mine who can help me work this through, and written down on a short list of paper, on a piece of paper, on a short list, what are the values we want for our home? And those values are the godly values upon which we build the foundation of our home. When people come into our home and they cross the threshold, what values do they sense? What values do we want to project? What's important here? Examples of those values are on the right side there. So this is a place of a godly atmosphere. This is a place that has family buy-in. Oh, there's a poll. Yay. Okay, so let's take a second to go through and look at this poll. There are just a few questions on here. And what I'd like to do is just take a break to look at these questions and ask the question, how have we set values, and do I have a sense of what my home values are? Would you guys be willing to do that? Yeah, so while you're finishing that up, and thank you for just an engagement tool to help ask the question. This was the challenge that my wife and I lived through 25 years ago. An older couple that we really admired who had 3 girls. Turned out we ended up having 3 girls ourselves. So, God knew what he was doing in putting us under them. And they challenged us, have you guys sat down as a young married couple and said to each other, what is the culture you want in your home? And I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we're a good Christian couple. We go to church, we have our good jobs. We love each other. I guess that's our culture. And he said, no, no, no. When your wife walks in the room and a bikini commercial is on TV and she sees the commercial you're watching and then she looks at you and you feel caught, is that the culture you wanted in your home? That was the example that guy gave me. And I was like, well, I guess if I'm just watching a football game, I can't help what commercial comes on. And he said, oh, are you the victim? Are you just letting anything come across the threshold of your home? And he really challenged me with that idea of what is the culture of our home. And so that second question, or that second statement, we are the threshold guardian. We don't have any problem saying no stranger is going to come past my door, right? I lock the door. I have a secure home. I would never let a stranger into my home. And yet we don't seem to have the same sense of ownership over the digital threshold, the media that comes into our home, and what choices are we wanting to make. So the poll results, regarding the media and digital content in our home, I'm clear on what our values are for our home culture. Most people saying somewhat clear. Nobody's saying kind of foggy, but somewhat clear. So I would say, have you gone out on a date night lately? And of course, with COVID, that might just be going outside, some of the front stuff. But away from the kids in a formative conversation and saying, what are the values that we want? Let's write down 5 values we want in our home, and see how we live to reflect those. My spouse and I, or partner or fellow guardian, are on the same page about digital screen use. Okay, most of us, we don't agree on everything. We have a pretty open dialogue. And then a few of us, this feels a little bit risky, or I'm going to pass. Totally understand that. Especially if we're having difficulty with our kids and we're trying to somehow figure out what their boundaries should be, but we're not aligned. Well, they, of course, will smell that a mile away. And so we really do need to sit down, and there's no substitute for talking it through, right? And over communicating is communicating. And at the end of the day, what can we agree on? If we're going to disagree on some things, what can we commit to as we establish a culture of consistency for our home? Taking time to write down our home culture values seems like a good place to start. Yes, I agree. We will set a time. To me, again, there's no substitute for saying, okay, we're actually going to have a meeting about this, and let's not do it when something has flared up and emotions are high. Let's go plan. It's intimidating to keep up digital content. Strongly agree, it's just too much. Somewhat agree, I need better tools. Okay, most of us are saying it's intimidating to keep up with digital content. Here's what I want to give a tool tip on that. Do you have to keep up with all the hot apps that are out there and understand all of the Urban Dictionary language that's going on? It is, of course, very smart to be checking Urban Dictionary and seeing what is this lingo that the kids are using these days. And sure enough, it's not going to be my kid, but it's probably going to be my kid's friends. And so I at least want to know that, right? So we can tell ourselves that it's important to stay on top of that. But what you can know is the atmosphere inside your kid's phone, the atmosphere inside your spouse's phone, the atmosphere, my spouse knows the atmosphere inside my phone. So I don't need to know all the apps that are out there. But if I notice that my kid had added a new app without permission, what's that app? How is that environment in their phone changed? Right. So I don't need to know everything that's out there, but I better know what's going on in here. Okay. And then if I'm honest, my own digital life is as addictive as my kids. Most of us reluctantly agree. And that, of course, is, where that can start. The last thing I want to mention on this is that, it's important to talk about these things in a safe environment, not when something's happened. If something's happened, it's not the time to talk about it. We're either in the red zone or the blue zone. We've either frozen everybody out or we've gotten really hot. Let's wait till there's a safe time in the green zone where we can have a family meeting and be talking about what is it that we want in these values, and then how do we want to address them when we're in our home environment. This is another screenshot that you can take. What are some digital policies that then could reflect our values? Sarah posted some questions earlier tonight that we were looking at in terms of the kinds of questions people have, and some of the questions are, well, how do you even set kind of like these digital boundaries or these digital policies for our home? And I want to give just a couple of shout outs here. Number one is, it is important to have places for privacy, but we do not want a home where there is secrecy. I want to make a real clear distinction, because some parents will say, well, I don't want to look in my kid's phone because I want to respect their privacy. I will tell you, there is no privacy in the smartphone from the world's standpoint. I just want to be really clear about that. The world does not care and does not respect the privacy inside your smartphone or your kid's smartphone. Anything you post will go public and will be reposted over and over and over again. But we need to know where we can have privacy, not secrecy. And I think it's really important, and I'm the dad of 3 girls who live this, that my kids know that I will never look in their diary or their journal, ever. I just will not. When they're away at camp or when they go off to college, I talked to a dad, and this happened to him. His daughter went off to college. He finally read her diaries. And then she found out, and she hasn't spoken to him for 8 years, in her 20s. So where are those places where we really can honor each other in our privacy? When you're writing in your journal and you're getting your thoughts out in your journal, mom or dad are never going to read that. But your phone is a different atmosphere. My spouse looks in my phone, I look in my spouse's phone, and we do that in front of the kids. We model each other in front of the kids. For some couples that I talk to, that's a big one. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I would want to even look in my husband's phone. Okay, well, then that's a good place to ask each other what the heck's going on. 2 of the titans that created the digital age for us, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, did not allow cell phones in their children's lives. That may be a shocker. So we're getting questions like, well, is 8 years old too young? 7 years old? I just want to say, Bill Gates, his kids didn't get cell phones until they were 14. No phones at the table or in the bedroom. Steve Jobs, he was very clear. He said, oh, my kids don't get the iPad. It's too addictive. So just want to kind of throw those out there. And then what is a suggestion for what replaces sometime? If we want to say there's sometimes we're going to have some digital screen-free zones or some digital-free zones in our home. What are some of the values we want in our home? And for us, one of the values we wanted in our home was that our home would be a place where worship starts. That we wouldn't just be the family that goes to church and that's where it starts, but that our home would be a place of worship. So especially when our kids were elementary through junior high age, every Sunday afternoon, and this is where I had to start by being the dad and say, no more NFL. For about 8 years, I didn't really watch NFL because, even though it's important to me, because this was more important for us as a family value. And the copy, paraphrase, obey method is something that has been super, super tested and trusted for us. And so just very simply, we're going to choose a gospel story to read. Jesus feeds the 5,000. We each have a journal or a notebook. We take the time to read it out loud, and then we copy. So it's going to take about 12 minutes. We copy down that 5 or 6 verse section. Then, guess what? We rewrite it again, each of us, in our own paraphrase. And so each of us is starting to put this into words. Now, the little ones actually are doing it in crayon drawings. And we still have this big stack of one of those large Post-it note poster things where you flip the pages over, of large crayon drawings of, like, Moses in the burning bush, or Jesus in the boat with the disciples. And I still can picture those crayon drawings of kind of the paraphrase of those stories. And then going back and circling words that stand out. Each person circle a few words that stand out. And those are the words to think about applying and obeying. Over time, this creates a culture in our home that even the most grumpy of the kids starts to agree, maybe reluctantly, okay, yes, that's kind of a fun time. And then as they got into college and wanted to come home and came home for Thanksgiving, it's like, oh my gosh, can we do a gospel story together? And it became a real place of comfort as our kids got into college and came home. There are some helps. I have a 4-page document called Screen Time Management Apps, because parents ask me all the time, what are the right programs that you recommend? And so Sarah has a PDF document that she can post that's pages and pages and pages of different kinds of resources. But one I want to just throw out there is Chick-fil-A did this national campaign a few years ago. And this was kind of before they came to the West Coast, called the cell phone coop. And when you went to Chick-fil-A and asked for a cell phone coop, they gave you this paper box with nothing in it. And then if you eat lunch in the restaurant and everybody puts their cell phones in the box and closes it and leaves the cell phones in the box during the whole meal, at the end of the meal, management gives everybody a free ice cream cone. And this was a long summer campaign that Chick-fil-A did that became very popular. And I used it as a kind of a teaching suggestion for a lot of families to say, you can have a simple rule that says no phones at the table during dinner time, but you can also create an incentive experience where it's fun to put all of our phones in the basket, close the lid. Daddy, don't go in there. Don't go in there, Daddy. We're not done yet, until the very end. So just one way to think about it. And then just a couple things to leave you with. And I couldn't do this without giving a shout out to my wife, Vicki, who is the strength in our marriage. She's good friends with Kara Powell, and she's a specialist in child development. And Vicki and our oldest daughter, Ingrid, have a national podcast called Hi Mom, Let's Talk. And they've been doing this for a couple of years now. My oldest daughter is a Broadway actor, singer, dancer in New York City. And so the journey of her leaving home, going to college, and then going to, live as a young adult, and how she and her mom tracked that experience, I find just amazing to hear them talk through those experiences. And so, and their talks are raw, honest, guttural, full of tears and some laughter. And so I just want to kind of give that shout out if you're interested in kind of hearing some real life stories of what that's been like to live through in their podcast, Hi Mom, Let's Talk. And then finally, for folks who are feeling discouraged, like, my kids are so far gone and all we do is fight about this stuff, and there's not even a place to start here. We kind of missed it. You're talking about elementary school, but I got a 16-year-old that won't talk to me, and he just is stuck, playing in these video games all day or whatever. I just want to say, I don't want to be Pollyanna. It can be really, really frustrating and even scary. In my own personal family story, that was our story when I was a little boy. And I grew up in a family that had a lot of alcoholism in it and some other pretty big traumas that happened in the middle of a crumbling marriage, and Dad walked out on us. And yet, through the middle of that process, the Lord got a hold of him, and my dad found sobriety, and then he found faith, and then he found his family, and actually came back a couple years later, and in that process led the rest of us to the Lord when I was an older tween. And having grown up in a house full of chaos, in a house full of no discipline and lots of other stuff, we still found an opportunity to go through those changes. So I just want to give an encouragement that it's never too late to start. And, if you're feeling that way, certainly want to resonate with you in that. Just like Art provided, that's my email, and happy to stay in touch with anybody at any point for any questions.
Wow, that was so good, Rick. Thank you so much for that. What a great response. And I've got a couple things in front of me. I was like, ooh, I need to write that down, even though my daughter's about to be 18 and moving towards out of the house. But I wanted to give Art an opportunity to respond as well. What were some things, Art, that you heard in Rick's presentation that sparked some ideas for you or thought were really important to highlight?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of great stuff, and I wish Chick-fil-A would sell those coops or something because it's a good idea. But the one interesting thing when you were talking about the compulsion loops, and I talk with students about this, that they've started calling it the attention economy. But because of how digital works with advertising and data and all that, like, you wonder, why would anybody do this? But the longer you're on the app, the more advertising you see, the more data they collect. And so it's actually, just that's kind of the, I don't know, impulse there, is that it's good for business, but kind of bad for everything else. But I was also thinking, you talked about the culture of their phones and kind of which apps and stuff like that. And I think one of the biggest things personally for me is just having the Bible app as one of the first things I see when I unlock my phone. It's amazing, not even necessarily opening it, but just, you just sort of see it there, and it kind of reminds you, what you're about and some of that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's, I don't know, that's been helpful for me. And then the one poll question you mentioned of keeping up with the technology, the most sort of consistently popular app with young people, especially with teenagers, is text messaging. And so that's, yes, there's TikTok and Clubhouse and all this other stuff. But, the one kind of the one that occupies the most time for them in most cases is just text messaging. So I think that's, not too daunting to kind of keep up with what's happening there.
Yeah, those are great. There was a couple pieces for me, Rick, that were super, super helpful. I love the idea of that the privacy versus secrecy piece, that there is a sense of privacy and privacy that we want to make sure that our kids have. They need that in order to do what Art was talking about in terms of kind of helping define their own identity, right? Like you've got to be able to find that. I offer things that we've done in our household, namely because I feel like we stumbled across them and we were like, "Ooh, that worked! That was awesome!" So, when we were first sharing our phones, and my daughter got a phone, we had said to her, "Yeah, we can look at everybody's phone," and she goes, "I can look at your phone," and I said, "Absolutely! Here's the password." And so she had the ability to look into our phones, and she did that for a long while and scrolled through the conversations that me and her mom were having, and and it was I think she felt like, okay, I'm a part of that, and I feel like this is an open space. But there are other places in our lives where like, no, you don't read this. This is the other space not to go. The other thing I thought was interesting, and I guess I'll just add to, is that that the phones are too addictive, and I had known that, and I remembered the story when you said it about Steve Jobs and
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates,
Yeah.
not allowing the phones in the house, and those things kind of come in and go out. But one of the things I guess I would add to that is, I think there's also a fear in the preteen moments of saying we don't want to have them have the phones or the social media or those type of things, and that's fine if you want to hold off until way later. I absolutely encourage that, and those are conversations you have to have in your house. But don't allow the apps or the holding off of them having a phone become the guardian that Rick was talking about, right? Like you're still the guardian of
That's
all
right.
the things that come in. Like the apps are only going to be helpful to you, right? They're only going to be helpful to you as much as you engage, and the and the holding off of the phone is only going to be helpful as you prepare to give them a phone and know exactly what boundaries you're going to set and what are the things that you want to set up for that. So if you need more time to create those conversations and have those conversations with your family, please do. But don't think that holding off a phone from 12 to 14 is going to be the magic bullet, and they're just not going to want to be a part of that anymore. That'll be a hard moment for you to
totally agree.
wake up and go, oh shoot, that didn't really work. So anyway, that's a thing. We put in the chat that you can ask questions, especially in the Q&A. We'd love to get to those questions. We already have one question in the Q&A. We'll get to that in a second. But I would love to jump to one of the questions that we got early on, and that we had talked about before. And so to either one of you, Art or Rick, should kids 4 to 5 years old avoid app games at all, or is it okay for them to play games for leisure for an hour or so? Sometimes I wonder if they could learn something good through some fun app games. Thoughts, one of you?
Yeah, sure. I just would say that, in moderation, for a 4 or 5 year old, and by the way, we're still in this kind of not out of COVID yet, right? So we're still in this space of a lot of homeschooling, a lot of time at home. How could I not let my kid do something in those spaces? I guess I would look at moderation and what are we doing together? So I'm not sending my kid into an app that I'm not participating with. So everything just like I wouldn't let them watch, surf through YouTube and just be watching random videos that could get into some questionable areas. So my kids, if my 4 and 5 year olds app time is time that we do together. And that's where I have to stay engaged as a parent. I can't just turn it over to them and walk out the room and frankly go into my own phone dive. So this is going to be an inclusive time, just like you may have sat through countless hours of Paw Patrol. You know, so guess what? You're going to be sitting through the hour or the half an hour or the 20 minutes or however long you think is a good appropriate time for some moderate time in some of the app games. Some of my favorite app games for preschoolers right now are related to things that are building apps. So the Cat in the Hat Builds That is a really, really good one. I love that one for 4 and 5 years old, 4 and 5 year olds. As you can imagine, in the environment of the Cat in the Hat. But the Cat in the Hat Builds That is a really fun kind of construction building STEM type experience. CodeSpark is also another one that introduces really light coding ideas in the super kind of elementary stages that also make it a lot of fun. And then you can feel good about the time you're spending in there. Art, do you have any thoughts?
I was going to mention Common Sense Media. I don't know if
Common Sense is a great one. Oh yeah, sure. I know them well.
Reviews of different sort of content. Usually pretty solid, I think, recommendations and stuff. And I guess the only other thing would be to just, talk to other parents and try to read a review or something like that. And with a lot of the apps, they can sort of choose to be educational, but there isn't like some kind of a vetting process for that. So it might be in the kind of the educational section or something like that in the App Store. But that doesn't, that might just be kind of to get parents to download it for their kids.
Yeah.
But I think just
one thing that I like to say in general with kids is that and I'm glad you mentioned our screen time, comes from a kind of an antiquated reference to TV, but we're calling this time we spend in our phone, right? This screen time that you get. Screen time is not a right, and it has to be earned. Just like when I earned TV time when I was a little kid, my chores had to be done, my homework had to be done, my bed had to be made, and then maybe I could still watch Happy Days, but only Happy Days, not Laverne and Shirley, right? Or whatever, So, you know how old I am. 53, by the way, a child of the 70s. So, just thinking of that, this is not a right, and one of those other questions, like how much time screen time with my 8-year-old argues every day, 1 to 2 hours is enough. There can be negotiables and non-negotiables, and we can set a time ahead of time. So if we've been formative and we've had a family meeting and we've said 1 hour a day is your limit, then I know and he knows. And then when that 1 hour is reached, it's not negotiable. It's over, But if I haven't really set the time and I'm just reacting and I've gotten tired and I haven't really reinforced it, well, then the kids knows it's negotiable, and the more they argue, the more time they're going to get. And I'm teaching them that they can argue more time with me, and then we both get tired, right? So
yeah, those are good. Those are really good. Art, I know you've spent a lot of time talking about gaming and how good that is for boys. And so here's a question specifically, I think for you: how much gaming time per day is considered acceptable, and how many hours will it be, or how many hours would be considered too much? And maybe you can expand on that, and just in terms of what you know about gaming in particular.
Yeah, there's a lot of. It's a good question, and there's a lot of research, and I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on the game, kind of. And I was actually sort of surprised looking at a lot of the stuff about violent video games, that there are kind of some negative effects that will start to happen, just with kids becoming a little more aggressive and some of that kind of stuff. But I think kind of the flow thing that I mentioned, if you can keep kids from getting too kind of immersed in it. I think the first-person shooter games are kind of considered the worst in terms of effects. Where you're looking around shooting people. And then just if it has, I think it's better if there's a social piece. So if it fits into kind of what I was talking about, where they're playing it with their friends, then that kind of fits into that identity formation stuff. That they're, instead of roaming around the neighborhood, lighting firecrackers like I did when I was younger. They're kind of roaming around playing the game or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of depends on the game, but that would be kind of my initial reaction.
Awesome. There's another question around social media, and I'm going to combine two. And this is for either one of you. Can you address the issue of social media addiction? What are the signs, symptoms, and how can they be dealt with? And then here's the second question. So now that we know kids shouldn't use social media, how can we actually convince them that they shouldn't use social media?
Um, yeah, well, the addiction, I can say a little bit about the addiction thing. I know the one really interesting thing with teenagers is that the the kids that have the highest social media use tend to either be the ones that are doing really well and are happy and content and socially thriving and that kind of thing, or it's the kids that are depressed and struggling, with mental health issues and stuff like that. And so that's kind of a frustrating, you know, um, predicament, because if it's scenario A, you don't want to, pull the kid away from it because it's all kind of healthy social interaction and that type of thing, versus the alternative. But I think it kind of, to me, it's one of those trust your gut kind of situations. And especially, I think and this, I guess, gets into the second part of it, but if kind of what you're seeing from your kids in real life in terms of their demeanor and that kind of thing is really different from what they're putting on social media, then that sometimes can be kind of a red flag, because they're trying to kind of project being more okay than they're actually feeling. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah, part of it, I think it does, is that, how can we convince kids that they shouldn't do something they're addicted to, right? And so we asked the question about how do you talk to somebody in addictive behavior cycles. One thing we know a lot about for Gen Z is that Gen Z kids care a lot about certain causes. They care a lot about the environment. They care a lot about healthy eating. Kids are making choices at a very young age about what their diet looks like, the kind of choices they're going to make with their friends about what they're going to eat and not eat, things that they are involved in or posting about related to the environment. So we know in some places in our kids' lives, there is a tremendous passion for stuff that's good for us and good for our community and our society and the world, right? And even for me, and since I'm not eating that, Dad, you're eating a steak, but I've gone vegan, whatever it is. And so let's work with that, because at some point, what I want to help you see, and I'm your parent, so you probably aren't going to listen to me, but who's the aunt voice in your life? Who's the uncle voice in your life who might also be some of these voices that can help talk about what is it that's really good for you? Because at some point that trigger started to happen for you in these other habits that you're also starting to develop as a young person. So we lived through this with one of my daughters when in the first kind of generation of smartphones, this is going back probably 8 or 10 years ago, in texting. And, Art, you mentioned texting is still kind of the number one issue. And, my kids didn't get their smartphones until they were 14. They had to buy them themselves, by the way. So we never gave them anything. They had to earn the money. So a couple, $300. And then after a summer of jobs, she had the money and she bought her phone. And then we agreed with what she could be doing with it. But her texting was out of control. And this was the days when there wasn't unlimited texting. And we got these phone bills and it was like 6,000 texts last month, 7,000 texts the next month. Like, what is going on? How do we kind of get around this? And we did the contract thing and, you've used too many, so you're going to lose your phone privilege for a couple of weeks and then you can earn it back through your chores and okay, get your phone back, but then shoot the texting. And this happened all summer. And it was a battle all summer long. And then I remember late August, my wife and I are already in bed, the bedroom door opens, and my teenage daughter comes in the bedroom and climbs up on the bed with us. And she's getting a little sheepish, and she pulls out the phone bill. And she says, I want you guys to see something. And she hands us the phone bill. And she had circled where her phone account only had 400 texts for the month. From the girl who we'd been battling, who was doing 6,000, 7,000 texts a month. And then she, after, 4 or 5 months of this battle back and forth, had decided, I guess I see your point. Maybe this is not so good for me. And she was so proud to show us that piece of paper where she had, gotten down to 400 texts in a month. And so we got through that, and then we watched her cross that threshold. It was like, wow, we have a young adult. We have somebody who's starting to see that she can make choices that are going to help her. And so it was less about, I can't say that we were a part of convincing. I think we were a part of the patient kind of the holding the boundary and waiting. And then does that light finally start to go off somewhere? Please God, help that light go off. Just to
Yeah.
tell one more story for you.
That's great. That's great. There's another question. I think that's a great story for this next question is how should we be modeling phone/social media use? I'll take part of that. Is I think one of the things that we forget is that the cell phone. Who was it? Childish Gambino in his song "This Is America" says, "This is a celly. It's a tool," and we forget that it's a tool. And you don't walk around with your tool belt. I don't walk around with my hammer and I put like that stuff is away right now, and it's only out when I need to use it. Let me put it in a different context. I follow this gentleman who's an organizational guru, an organizational wizard, because I needed that at one particular point in time in my life, and I still follow some of those rules. And one of the things he said was, when you go into your email box, when do you do emails? Sit down at your desk, do your emails, and then close your emails and walk away and do other things. If you need to go to emails, then find a place, sit down with your phone, do your emails, and then close them down. Don't just sit there and scroll through emails, because it becomes that loop again. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes completely unintentionally. But we haven't chosen to use our phones as tools. We get up in the morning and it's the first thing that we grab because we got to check some emails. Well, are we using it as a tool or is it a response, right? And I think that's one thing I would say about modeling phone use is figuring out how to use it as a tool. Like, I'm using this for this particular purpose right now, and now I'm shifting away from that purpose and I'm going outside, or I'm going to go do this. Even running, as a runner myself, there's so many apps on my phone that I could use, and I've decided that all I want is a watch, and I don't want to bring my phone with me, because it just becomes this thing that's always around and it's ringing in my phone while I'm trying to disconnect a little bit. So those are ways that I think about it. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts around that.
Sure. Yeah. I agree about the tool analogy is a good one. Here's one for you. I still use a small little music iPod. So these are great because you can buy them used online for 20 bucks, 15 bucks.
Cheap.
So they're virtually throwaway. And so I have a couple of little non-screen music iPods at all times. And so for when I'm go bike riding. And so when I go bike riding, I don't like to take my big giant fancy iPhone 12. I could load all my music on that, but then I got my phone with me, and then people could email me, or a work thing could come up, or et cetera, right? Same thing you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I actually do go through the trouble of putting recycling or upcycling the mix on my iPod. So, and it's just tiny, and it just slips right in my pocket when I'm cycling, so I still have my music with me. Good example. So do I always have to get stuck in this idea that this is the thing that has to be with me all the time, or can there be places and boundaries around it? And what is the tool for it, and when do I use it? That's a great example.
Yeah, that's great. I think the last question we'll get to, and I see a couple more, and we'll make sure that we get answers to everybody's questions who sent one in. But Art, what is the reason for increased anxiety, stress, or depression with kids and social media these days? Like, like in your research, what have you found to be one of the reasons?
I mean, it's a little bit of, there's a little debate of like chicken or the egg type of thing. If kids are seeking this because it sort of helps them to feel less anxious or something, versus causing it. But there is some, evidence that I think it causes it. And I think a lot of it is that kind of constant connection sense of just always feeling like they need to be keeping up with kind of everything that's happening kind of in phone land as they're trying to go through real life. But, and then I think the depression, thing is kind of the obvious, the same way that that Rick talked about it a little bit, the way that it affects adults, of just kind of comparing ourselves to other people, and not recognizing that most of what people are sharing is really fake and not, genuine, and that type of thing. But it is interesting, and again, Rick mentioned that young people are sort of passionate about a lot of kind of health related topics and stuff. And every assignment I've given where I let students choose the topic, I get probably 60% of the papers are about mental health. And there's a lot of interest in it. And I think if the next sort of generation turns a corner with some of this stuff, I think that's going to be, I feel like they're very kind of interested in that, and wanting to, and recognizing that there are these kind of negative trends. And the more it seems like technology is kind of connected to that, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I want to mention for all the parents that are out there, just a reminder that Lake Avenue Church has a great counseling center, and you can go on our website. You can call in and make an appointment with any one of the counselors that are there, for you, for your family. I think mental health is a real issue, and we need to help our kids figure out the things that they're wondering about, they're feeling, they're struggling about, they're comparing themselves to kids. And I so appreciate what you said, Rick, about looking at things that were negative. I mean, that's just that's a problem that we all have, and that we need to be aware of. And when we're aware of it, then we've got to address it. We can't just be like, oh yeah, that's a thing, and then not have to worry about it. As we wrap up, I just want to be so thankful for you all, Rick and Art, for helping us expand this discussion about technology for our families. This has actually been really great. I've got some notes even for myself as we move forward with our daughter, who's 18, or will be 18 here shortly. I've learned so much. I hope that you all have as well. Art, any last words you want to share for the folks?
I just repeat kind of the last part of what I said earlier, that I think, it's helpful to be reminded that, like, this is really difficult. It was difficult before COVID, and it's even more difficult now. And give yourself some grace. And I think your kids will recognize, that if you have the right intentions and you're trying your best, I don't think that that they won't sort of recognize that in the long run. So
great. Thanks so much. Rick, last words?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you so much. And I want to commend everybody for joining, taking the time to just come together as a community and to listen and talk with each other about this. We're all kind of walking through this together. I do have one question I want to answer, because there was a post from somebody who said, my kid is 20 and I feel like it's too late, that I've lost the window, and that they've spent all their time in gaming versus like school and homework, and is it over and have I missed? And my heart goes out to you. And I want to say that you're not a failure, and that your 20-year-old child has a lot of development to do. And there is plenty of opportunity for hope and growth. But I do want to suggest something, and I haven't yet, this is not the time to talk about tonight, but I am also the parent of an adult child who is going through drug and alcohol addiction recovery. And so there are some questions to ask about, what are my boundaries with my 20-year-old? And gaming behaviors that have pulled them away from homework, pulled them away from societal responsibilities, or even just the responsibilities of a 20-year-old, can fall into some of those categories. And so I definitely would encourage you to maybe consider contacting the Lake Avenue Counseling Center. It doesn't have to feel all fancy and serious, It could just be something that's super informal, and finding a safe place to talk about that. Not for how do I fix my 20-year-old at all. It's really about how am I doing, and how do I understand where my boundaries are? Because that's, I think, the thing to kind of think about for yourself and your walk and your support circles for you. So I just want to speak some encouragement into you in that area.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us. Please know that your family ministry staff here at Lake Avenue Church wants to be there for you, for your families. Stay connected to what we have for your kids by checking on our website. In the coming weeks, we're going to have our webpage up, the parenting webpage up, and you'll be able to see more of the tools and resources that we've been built here and previous webinars as well, including our webinar on mental health. I would encourage you to go back and look at that. You can go to lakeav.org/family ministries. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email with a list of resources that we suggested, as well as a link to where you can find this video online. And lastly, remember that we're hosting a coffee conversation this Saturday at 9 a.m. on Zoom. Invite your friends if you're willing to continue to have this conversation. It will be in the normal Zoom platform, and we'll just be able to chat with each other. It's another way to encourage ourselves in this community. The information is on our website, or you can contact Sarah at sarahb@lakeav.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this has been helpful for you as you try to parent uniquely better. Good night.